It's the and Terry Show. The pause and Terry. ... and Terry. Jim, still missing from the chair in the hot seat, contributing to the dialogue, the conversation, and impressions, and I know he would love to sink his teeth into this, and when he comes to visit, we will certainly do a banter about it. What are we talking about? The interview. Probably the most looked for interview. Although I didn't want to. I was morbidly fascinated, so I didn't want to, but I did. I listened to Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin. Two of the most, dare I say it, I don't know Tucker Carlson, but loathsome. I mean, he serves himself. He serves the god of money, or whatever it is that drives his sense of what is right and what is wrong and what's in it for him. And, of course, lining up, the only journalist to get that interview with Putin. Why? So many obvious answers to that question. And I posed it in a previous podcast that he comes fresh on the heels of rankling the far right in Canada. Where else would you do that? In Texas North, which I call Alberta. Yes, so directly from Alberta out to Moscow and the interview. Now, I'm going to give you my 2 cents worth, and I'll play a snippet of it just to say, yeah, see, I did listen to it. And there will be an analysis, of course, all over the place, I would imagine. Or people might choose to ignore it, not choosing to give a platform to this kind of, dare I say, propaganda? Could it be that anything that Russia publishes or allows to be shared is anything but propaganda? Yeah, okay. Well, you found my bias. I don't believe it's possible. And I'll share this as a story of revisionist history. When I was at the University of Waterloo in my Renaissance and Reformation course, and we had a guest lecture from what was then the Eastern Bloc, the East German delegate. Most of Reformation history is, of course, about Germans and about the German perspective on things. It was Martin Luther who began the Reformation. So documents in German, and of course East Germany was controlled by the Soviet Union, USSR. And so it was my first exposure to, I had read these documents and we had gone over them in prepping for this conference. And it was insightful to me to hear the delegates from the USSR, East Germany, totally misrepresent, misconstrue, rewrite all the data that we had come across in our sources. And of course, our sources are the sources that we have control over. We didn't have all the documents because East Germany was under Soviet control. So all the documents that we had exposure to and read and shared and analyzed, the Reformation, a people's revolution. No, it was not a people's revolution at all, but that was the thrust because all history had to be interpreted through the Soviet lens. You had to come to their state-sponsored conclusions. And that's my first inclination to judge the lens of this interview, Tucker Carlson and Putin, through the same lens. What is the agenda? Because you do serve the state, and Putin is the state. L'état c'est moi, said a famous French noble, French king who subsequently lost his head. No, L'état c'est moi, was that Louis XIV or Louis XVI? I'll have to look that one up. Yeah, so here we go. Just a snippet to let you know. Propaganda. How can you recognize it? If you don't know history, if you didn't study it yourself, this is one smooth politician. Not talking about Tucker Carlson, who is his usual dink of a self. It's Putin. Master class in how to massage. He's masterful. And if you didn't know anything, you would say, what a nice old guy. Until he stabs you in the back, slits your throat, leaves you to bleed out on the floor, gives you some radioactive substance in your tea while you were doing the interview and you die suddenly. Yeah, remember who you are talking with. He's not your friend, Tucker Carlson. Be that as it may, here we go.
Shot February 6, 2024 at about 7 p.m. in the building behind us, which is, of course, the Kremlin. The interview, as you will see if you watch it, is primarily about the war in progress, the war in Ukraine, how it started, what's happening, and most pressingly, how it might end. One note before you watch. At the beginning of the interview, we asked the most obvious question, which is, why did you do this? Did you feel a threat, an imminent physical threat?
Yeah.
And that's your justification. And the answer we got shocked us. Putin went on for a very long time, probably half an hour, about the history of Russia going back to the 8th century. And honestly, we thought this was a filibustering technique and found it annoying and interrupted him several times. And he responded he was annoyed by the interruption. But we concluded in the end, for what it's worth, that it was not a filibustering technique. There was no time limit on the interview. We ended it after more than 2 hours. Instead, what you're about to see seemed to us sincere, whether you agree with it or not. Vladimir Putin believes that Russia has a historic claim to parts of Western Ukraine. So our opinion would be to view it in that light, as a sincere expression of what he thinks. And with that, here it is. Mr. President, thank you. On February 22nd, 2022, you addressed your country in a nationwide address when the conflict in Ukraine started. And you said that you were acting because you had come to the conclusion that the United States, through NATO, might initiate a, quote, surprise attack on our country. And to American ears, that sounds paranoid. Tell us why you believe the United States might strike Russia out of the blue. How did you conclude that?
It's not that America, the United States, was going to launch a surprise strike on Russia. I didn't say that. Are we having a talk show or a serious conversation?
Here's the quote. Thank you. It's a formidable, serious talk.
Because your basic education is in history, as far as I understand.
Yes.
So if you don't mind, I will take only 30 seconds or 1 minute to give you a short reference to history for giving you a little historical background.
Please.
Let's look where our relationship with Ukraine started from. Where did Ukraine come from? The Russian state started gathering itself as a centralized statehood, and it is considered to be the year of the establishment of the Russian state in 862, when the townspeople of Novgorod invited a Varangian prince, Rurik, from Scandinavia to reign. In 1862, Russia celebrated the 1000th anniversary of its statehood. And in Novgorod, there is a memorial dedicated to the 1000th anniversary of the country. In 882, Rurik's successor, Prince Oleg, who was actually playing the role of regent at Rurik's young son, because Rurik had died by that time, came to Kiev. He ousted two brothers who apparently had once been members of Rurik's squad. So Russia began to develop with two centers of power, Kiev and Novgorod. The next very significant date in the history of Russia was 988.
Well, it goes on from there, and we have a problem. This is definitely a history that Putin is used to telling. It's probably the party line, but it is one that has very loose connections to the reality of history, as historians would tell it. Maybe not as Russians would tell it. But there is certainly the notion that Russia and most of the European states did not have what we would call national state identities until after the 13th or 14th century. So to trace your people to the 8th century is really just to say there were people who looked and sounded something like us in this area at that time. far different cry than saying, yeah, the Ukrainian people were Russians who were on the fringe, which is what he went on to say. The whole thing goes on for 2 hours. You can listen to it. It is interesting, both because it tells us what Tucker Carlson is and is not. He is a propagandist. He gave an open platform to Putin, one of the most sought-after interviews, and really did not do what I would call the hardball questions. He allowed Putin to do what Putin does. Masterfully massage questions, respond only to the things that he wanted to, and said exactly what he wanted to, including a number of direct shots at American democracy and the disorder of the Republican Party within American democracy. Wow. Tucker Carlson, you gave Putin a platform to slam. Now, slam is my interpretation. It's a word to say that Putin, in his own way, he sounded like a jolly old fella with a story to tell. And he's a masterful storyteller. He's mesmerizing. And the voice they chose for the translator was masterfully chosen as well, deeper than Putin's own voice, with an air of authority and confidence. Putin did what he wanted. He got public relations coup from Tucker Carlson. Is Carlson a useful idiot? Well, that remains to be seen. I read a response to this proposed interview when it was in the works, probably developing narratives while Tucker Carlson was in Alberta with Daniel Smith, poo-pooing and castigating our own prime minister as an authoritarian. Meanwhile, here, did Tucker Carlson dare to call Putin a cross-dressing poser? Of course not. He would have had radioactive tea during break time. Yeah, so Carlson gets away with saying stuff that he chooses for his own platform to monetize it and make money. Okay, so he's a capitalist, so what else? But he's also disingenuous, and that's the part that irks me. He has an agenda. He knows he's being played. Putin played Carlson so well. Did you know Carlson tried out for the CIA? Probably most people did. But Putin threw that. He threw out little gems to say, I know who you are, Tucker Carlson. I've got dirt on everybody. Sort of like J. Edgar Hoover in the FBI, always had dirt on every president so that he could come out on top of any melee that was going to ensue about political differences. Putin's masterful. You should be afraid of him. And if he says, it's just all because of NATO, the United States, no, we're not worried. Yeah, we're in charge. We have so many great weapons. No, we're not. Yeah, it sounds like everything's going well for Vladimir Putin. Tucker Carlson aided and abetted that crime. Yeah, I'm tired of saying it. Read history, study history, get an education. But don't listen to Tucker Carlson or Vladimir Putin if you want to get some facts on how things are unfolding or going to unfold. The Jim and Terry Show. Stay tuned. Bye-bye.